Right at the moment when the most terrible seeds in Raskolnikov's mind began to take root, right when he was about to finalize his perfect murder plan, he was noticed. Across the room sat a man in his 50s, pale and swollen from illness, his face the color of yellow wax. His eyes were nothing but narrow slits, red and inflamed, yet they burned with a frantic, feverish light. He wore an old black coat that had once looked respectable, now reduced to rags held together by a single desperate button. The broken man stared intently at the young student. Then he stood up. He picked up his smeared glass, staggered across the sticky floor, and dropped heavily into the chair opposite him. "Honored sir, may I venture to engage you in polite conversation?" The man's eyes locked onto him, like a drowning man clinging to a floating piece of wood. "I can see you are an educated man," the stranger rasped, tapping a cracked, dirty fingernail against his forehead. "My name is Marmeladov, titular counselor." From the bar, the tavern boys let out cruel snickers. The owner just smiled. They had seen this pathetic performance before. "Poverty, my dear sir, is not a vice," Marmeladov declared, his voice trembling with a tragic but misplaced sense of dignity. "But beggary. Beggary is a vice. In poverty, a man can still preserve the nobility of his soul. But when he becomes a beggar, he is swept out of human society like trash with a broom. He is forced to stare straight into the deepest pit of his own degradation." He leaned closer to the student. Waves of stale liquor rolled off him. "Do you know what it's like to go beg for a loan? When you know for certain you'll be refused? When the other person has absolutely no reason to feel sorry for you, and yet you still go anyway? Why do you still go?" the young man whispered, drawn in despite himself. The grand, theatrical tone suddenly vanished, leaving only a trembling, naked old man. "Because a man needs somewhere to go. There are times, sir, when you simply must have somewhere to go." Laughter echoed across the low, smoky ceiling. Marmeladov closed his eyes and bowed his head, as if waiting for a whip to strike his back. "I am a swine," he shouted to the whole room. "I have the face of a beast. But my wife, Katerina Ivanovna, she is a lady of noble blood. She scrubs floors until her hands crack and bleed. She coughs up blood into her rag, and I—" He slammed his heavy fist onto the sticky table. The glass jumped. "I sold her stockings for drink. I don't drink to forget. No, I drink so I can suffer twice as much." He collapsed forward, burying his wet face in his filthy hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were empty. In a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke of his 3 starving children, of Katerina pacing the room in a fever, and of his eldest daughter, Sonia. "She has no education," he murmured. "Only a gentle little voice and a pale, thin face." She asked my wife, "Do I really have to do something like that?" And Katerina, driven mad by the children's crying, answered, "Why not? What are you? Some kind of treasure to be protected." Marmeladov choked on his words. At 6 o'clock, Sonia put on her cape. At 9 o'clock, she came back. She walked straight to the table and laid 30 rubles on it. His voice broke. She wrapped our big green shawl around her head, lay down on the bed, turned toward the wall, and I just watched her little shoulders shaking. Tears carved paths through the dirt on his face. I lay drunk in the corner, and I watched my proud, noble Katerina Ivanovna crawling across the floor in the darkness. She knelt beside Sonia and kissed her feet until they both fell asleep in the cold. And I just lay there. Those memories seemed to strangle him. He poured the last of his liquor and drank it like medicine. But when he spoke again, a strange, tragic light returned to his eyes. 5 weeks earlier, a miracle had happened. A kind superior had given him back his old position. For a few brief, shining days, their miserable room had changed. They were a real family again. They cooked together. They saved every penny for his new uniform. Katerina Ivanovna, who had sold everything she owned to buy bread, pinned up her hair and suddenly looked young again. "She called me her little darling," Marmeladov whispered, a beautiful but broken smile touching his lips. "Looking at me now, you wouldn't think much of me, would you? But she pinched my cheek. She called me her darling." The young student sat in painful silence. Hearing about a man's ruin was bearable, but hearing about his salvation, knowing he was now sitting here in rags in a tavern, was pure hell. The smile collapsed. His wax-like face hardened into something horrifying. "The very next day," Marmeladov rasped, Like a thief in the night. I stole the key to her box. I took every last coin I had earned, and I ran.
He traded his uniform for vodka. Just this morning, desperate for a drink, he had begged Sonia for the last 30 kopecks she earned from her unspeakable work. She gave it to him, and he bought the drink they were now looking at. Marmeladov leaned across the table, his face twisting into a frantic, terrifying grin. "Tell me, sir, do you feel sorry for me or not? Tell me." He reached for the jug, but it was already empty. The tavern keeper burst out laughing and shouted over the noise, asking why anyone would waste even a drop of pity on a creature like him. Marmeladov dragged himself to his feet, swaying, his arm raised like a ruined prophet. "Pity," he cried, his voice ringing through the room. "There is nothing to pity me for. I deserve to be crucified. Nail me to the cross, O judge, but do it with pity as you drive the nails in." The tavern fell silent. He was no longer speaking to the drunks. He was speaking to the heavens. He spoke of the final judgment day when the Almighty would gather the wise and the righteous and then call forward the drunkards, the weak, and the children of shame. "He will say to us, 'Come forth, you swine,'" Marmeladov wept openly, without shame. "And the wise will ask why he receives us. And he will answer, 'I receive them because not one of them ever believed they were worthy of it.'" The spiritual fire flared up and died in the same breath. He collapsed back onto the bench, an empty shell of a man. "Let's go, sir," he whispered. "It's time for me to go home." The student accompanied Marmeladov back to his lodging. Every step up the pitch-black staircase felt like digging a grave. The old man leaned his full weight on the young man, trembling so violently that his teeth chattered. "I'm not afraid of her fists," Marmeladov gasped as they neared the 4th floor. "Let her beat me. The pain is good. It brings relief. No, I'm afraid of her eyes. I'm afraid of the red spots on her cheeks. I'm afraid of the way she breathes." The door was slightly open. Inside the tiny room, barely 10 paces long, a dying candle cast sickly yellow shadows. Katerina was pacing back and forth. Hunger and consumption had burned away everything except her fierce, terrible grace. Bright, feverish red circles burned on her sunken cheeks. She pressed her thin hands tightly against her chest, struggling for every breath in the damp air. In the corner, a little boy was crying in pure terror. His 9-year-old sister, looking like a fragile stick in an oversized old coat, had her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, whispering desperately into his ear. Through the open door down the hall, neighbors puffed on cheap tobacco and played cards, waiting for the night's entertainment to begin. Marmeladov dropped to his knees right at the threshold, pushing the young student forward as a human shield. Katerina stopped pacing. She stared at the bewildered stranger. Then her eyes fell to the floor. A sound tore from her throat like a trapped animal. She threw herself at her husband, her bony hands frantically searching his pockets for coins to feed her starving children. "Where is it?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Where are your clothes? You've drunk it all again." In a blind, screaming rage, she grabbed him by the hair and dragged him into the room. Marmeladov didn't resist. He crawled willingly, turning back to the student with a twisted smile. "This is a consolation to me, sir, a real consolation." The boy screamed. The neighbors crowded at the doorway, laughing and pointing at the family's destruction as if it were a show put on for their amusement. The filthy room, the screaming, the stench of sickness, it all pressed down on the student's chest until he could barely breathe. When Katerina turned her feverish rage on him, screaming at him to get out of her home, he stumbled backward into the hallway. But just before he left, his hand brushed against the few loose coins in his pocket. It was all the money he had. Without thinking, acting only on the ache in his chest, he quietly placed the coins on the windowsill. He hurried down the dark, twisting stairs, but the moment the cold night air hit his face, the fever broke. He stopped dead on the cobblestones, a bitter metallic taste rising in his throat. What a stupid thing to do, he thought. I needed that money. He almost turned back, but the thought of opening that door again and seeing the crying children made his stomach turn. He forced himself to walk away, a bitter, cynical laugh rising in his throat. They would use his money to buy bread tonight, and tomorrow they would be starving again. Sonia was their gold mine. They wept over her ruined soul, but they still ate the bread her soul had bought. Man gets used to everything, he thought, feeling the ice forming over his heart. What scoundrels. He stopped beneath the faint, sickly glow of a street lamp. The world was quiet here, and in that quiet, the terrible seed that had been lying dormant in his mind began to crack open. What if I'm wrong? He whispered to the empty street. What if man is not a scoundrel? He stared into the dark alleyways of the city, because if he is, then everything else is just prejudice. Then there are no rules and there are no barriers.